very much. As you were speaking, I kept wondering, I'm a bishop. I didn't get the bursary to go to private school. I didn't go to a model school, model C school either. So township school through and through, right? And the upgrade was at the village school. So you talk about dreams that we never thought would happen. This is one of them. My name is Mamokgethi. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you to Moshe for the invitation. I have to say, I get a lot of invitations to speak at schools, at many places, and I always wonder why. So when I got invited to speak at Bishops, I thought, why would they want to hear from me? And I'm sure they read my profile online. I'm not someone that Bishop would want to hear from, perhaps until they have proven themselves as Vice Chancellor. So I was surprised, and normally I don't speak for free. But here's the thing, I started a foundation in 2004, I got my PhD in 2002, and in 2003 I got an award for the most outstanding young researcher, and on the basis of my PhD, and then it was at that time that I was told that I was the first black African South African to get my kind of PhD. I was like, damn, the country has got a right to ask me 10 years from now, where are the others? And so I started the foundation. Then I thought, I don't have time to raise funds to ask anybody for money. I want to get on with my career. So anyone who asks me to speak must contribute to my foundation. So when I got a call from Bishops, I thought, they charge so much money. They charge the same amount of money we charge at UCT. And in fact, you'll hear in my talk later, some of the reasons why some parents can't afford UCT is because they pay bishops. So I thought that they must donate, because that's how I work. I'm like, I don't have to do this talk. People must donate to my foundation. That's how I fund the students through Dr. Lena. Every 1 year, in each year, I've got about 10 students that are at VETS, UP, UJ, TUT. We only got one from UCT this year, but we never had UCT before. UNISA, and we've had one from a nursing college. And so my PA said, no, Prof, it's not Bishops. This is Bishops, black boys, what. I thought it's Bishops. Who are they? What is this black boys, whatever? Did they go to Bishops? He said, yes. I said, they've got money. They must So thank you, Moshe. I got a sense of what this is about, because yesterday I kept thinking I made a mistake. These people should. As I've been meeting people who said, we are coming to your talk. We are coming to your talk. I'm like, these are very important people. Can they get my talk for free? so I've got a sense. So I don't regret. I think I made the right decision. So what am I going to talk about? I thought what I should do. I've entitled my talk. I thought I should be provocative. But anyway, anyone who has heard me speak would know that provocation is actually my way of getting people to think with me, to join me in grappling with the issues that I think are important to grapple with as a society. So this morning I thought I should share with you. I just entitled it this morning. I didn't know what to call it, but I called it, of course today is my 124th day in office as Vice Chancellor at UCT. And it's been rough, no honeymoon. Every day is different. I am definitely sure I've got the right job that they promised. So I thought I should call my talk Reflections of a Newly Appointed Vice Chancellor on Student Activism, is there any hope for the future? So, back in 2009, many analysts argued that the youth of South Africa was apathetic and apolitical. You just have to Google newspapers. They argued that they were unaware of the history of the struggle that made their lives better. These young people were given different names: the Born Frees, the Mandela Generation, Black Diamonds. In 2012, The South African Reconciliation Barometer described these overwhelmingly optimistic and less likely to blame apartheid for South Africa's current economic and social inequality. Fast forward 2015, and the same young people started the Fallist movement. The Statue of Rhodes at the University of Cape Town being first to fall, a chain of events was sparked all over the country, forcing universities to contend with hashtag Rhodes must fall, hashtag Africans must fall in the intellectual and symbolic space, and hashtag fees must fall in the material and admission space, and hashtag outsourcing must fall in the employment space. The question is, what happened to these young people, and how do we make sure that we do not get to the same place again in the future, either as institutions or as a country? The student protests are profoundly about political change. They are part of a larger challenge in the ruling elite, confronting constitutional agnosticism, corruption, and white privilege, all of which confront poverty and inequality. They are also not limited to South Africa. When you're in South Africa, you think they're only happening here, but they're not limited to South Africa, because the deeper issues of inequality and cultural alienation are urgent international issues. In the last 5 years, we've seen student protests flare up in many countries around the world, including in the Netherlands, where they had their own share in the demands for the new university, as well as the Banje Hayes and Magen-Hayes occupations. If you check in the US, you'll see the calls for decolonization and things to fall was there in the US as well. But for us in South Africa, this approach by students is not new. We all know that the story of South Africa is a story of political activism. In fact, some would argue that we wouldn't be a democratic country today if activism did not exist. Wars were waged in pre-apartheid South Africa between indigenous people and Dutch settlers, between Africans and Europeans. Battles were fought during our liberation struggle between the progressive forces and the racist apartheid regime and its sympathizers. It is part of our story, a fight for freedom, for justice, and for equality. These student protests are part of our legacy of fighting for equality, for non-racialism, for a fair distribution of wealth, and a fight for true liberation. The question is, why do the battles still need to be fought more than 20 years after the advent of democracy? We thought democracy means that we don't have to fight anymore. We've had spectacular unifying moments as a nation since 1994. Nobel Peace Prizes, 1995 Rugby World Cup, the founding of our world-renowned constitution, the 2010 FIFA World Cup, the inauguration of the South African Large Telescope, and more recently, the Square Kilometre Array Telescope, and many other nation-building events. But if truth be told, besides the euphoria, many young people today argue that the reconciliation project of the 90s did not deliver much for Black South Africans who remain poor. For them, democracy has not changed the apparatus of state, nor has it rethought the idea of the university. While 1994 provided a political solution to end apartheid, it did not reconstruct society in profound economic and structural ways. South Africa's triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment persist, and Black people remain at the bottom. And young people see our education system as one of the tools that perpetuates the problem. And so they express their anger at the education system. The statistics are sobering. Nearly 70% of South African learners attend no-fee schools. And many of these schools do not have access to water flush toilets. And primary school kids' deaths through falling into toilet pits still happen today, as it happened during my time when I started school under a tree in the village of Malapiani. While at the other end of the spectrum, just 2 to 5% of learners attend expensive and well-resourced private schools. For every 100 learners who start primary school, just over a quarter complete and pass their final high school exams or matriculate. 4 will go on to higher education, and just 1 will graduate. And of course, graduating from university dramatically increases one's chance of employment. The last time I checked, our country's unemployment rates stood at about 25.5%, and youth unemployment was almost double that. The chances of being absorbed into the workforce with a school leaving qualification are poor, at a mere 51.1%. And there are 71.7% chances of being absorbed into the workforce with tertiary education. This puts a high premium on gaining access to and graduating from university. The majority of students who get into university have attended better resource schools and have overcome an inferior education, or if they didn't attend better resource school, they have overcome inferior education to succeed, and the cost is high. Many parents seem more willing to pay high fees for private education, such as the one their children can get at Bishops. And by the time their children go to university, the parents are so much in debt, and they expect someone else to pay their children's fees. These are parents whose children do not qualify for NSFAS funding because the family income is higher than the prescribed 350,000 rands per annum. The competition for scholarship and bursaries is tight. University fees thus remain unaffordable for many black students who wish to attend university. But of course, those who get there, who have been to schools in poor areas, when they get there, they feel culturally, socially, and academically excluded. Students who are struggling financially and culturally also often struggle academically, and they feel understandably angry. And if you can imagine, at UCT, we choose the best students. So we choose them because they're the best. They come in, but they're struggling financially and culturally, and then it gets into the academics, and they get angry for the first time in their lives. They've been celebrated for 12 years. The first time in their lives, they're not even hitting a 50. And they get hugely, hugely angry. This perfect storm of the pressure to graduate in order to make a better life, while circumstances combine to make the path to graduation feel almost impossible, has given rise to a great deal of anger and nationwide protest. It is in this context that the Polists regard the 1994 Reconciliation Project as a failed project. They mock the idea of the Rainbow Nation. Some of them scoff at any suggestion that they should be friends with white people. And they ask why there is more wealth in the hands of white people now than there was during apartheid. We can get angry at them asking these questions. My suggestion is that rather than getting angry, we should understand why are they asking them, and why now, and is there anything that we can do differently, and maybe mobilize others like us to do things differently. The contestation around neoliberal economic policies is growing, and champions of economic liberation are not flexing their revolutionary muscles in political formations. There is also a swelling tide of civil unrest. Student formations have channeled these social forces to become political game changers in democratizing democracy. But the political is also about rethinking institutions and questioning their lack of transformation. The Follies movement has torn at the colonial edifice of the university, whose globalizing discourses have thinly camouflaged their northern ramparts. Debates around decolonizing higher education have rapidly assembled scholarly ammunition to mount the attack on epistemic fortresses that epitomize 19th and 20th century university curriculum. Students are attacking the conventional colonial canons of knowledge by marshalling African philosophy, indigenous knowledges, and research methodologies of the global south as an arsenal to disrupt chauvinist traditions of research and innovation and narrow exclusive curriculum. The untransformed academy has also galvanized marginalized black academics who describe the university in South Africa as a European greenhouse under African skies. If you think about it, black academics were not as organized as they are right now. They got much better organized after the Folies movement came into being. You never heard of Black Academics Caucus. Now you do. The weakness, of course, of the university is that it has not responded spontaneously to the vast opening of knowledges that has followed the end of the Cold War, and in McNullo's words, the colonial matrix of power is still in control. We should acknowledge that the Folies movement represents a black intellectual rage against the ideological superstructure of South African higher education and its whiteness. But more than just disrupting whiteness, our young people are celebrating their blackness. They're demanding that universities give them a curriculum and an experience that is cognizant of their inner revolution. Students want to read the work of their African forebears and icons, as well as that of other great black minds. They want an academic experience that better lends itself to our nation, to Africa, to the global south, to our context as black people in the diaspora. They want an academic experience that proclaims that being black is not a crime, and if they can succeed in a place that prepares young people for the working world, then the rest will be far easier to achieve. Students are summoning the wisdom of continental theorists and diasporan thinkers to engage academics in an epistemic battle. Populism and political tactics are strategically linked to a serious intellectual project to rethink the idea of the university as a space which enlarges reservoirs of knowledge, enhances epistemic competition, fosters diversity as inclusiveness, not simply tolerance, and advocates anti-racism so that the academic project can flourish. Until the Folies movement, the transformation agenda in South African universities had been dealt with as a matter of compliance, rather than as a matter of change in structures, ways of doing, ways of knowing, and ways of being. As uncomfortable as it has been, and of course, we can also talk at length about some of the problematic behaviors of students that came with the Folies movement. But if truth be told, it has pushed us to reflect on what we do as universities, why we do it, and how we do it. Certainly, for me, as a university leader, it has forced me, it has humbled me, to be frank. Even as a black academic and a black executive, it has humbled me to say I do not know enough. What is it that I do? Why do I do it? And how do I do it? My hope is that basic education, especially private schools such as Bishops, use this experience, even if you see it on TV, to reflect on what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. Because if we don't, we get forced to do that by these movements. Transformation. Oh damn, as it is, I lose my place. Right? Transformation is not just about the transfer of power from one elite to another. Because if we only focus on the transfer of power, then the people will continue to feel powerless, marginalized, and disillusioned, as is happening now. While changing the social composition of power is important, we must realize that it is not sufficient. We also need to transform the structures as well as ways of doing, ways of knowing, and ways of being. Because this is not just about the race and gender of who is in power, but it is also about their ideology. Because it is possible, actually, that you can have black people in power and the ideology remains the same. So it's about the ideology of the people who are in power, what they stand for, and what they represent, either for them as themselves or what they represent to people who they lead and people who observe what they do. What then do we learn from the Follies movement, as uncomfortable as it makes us? First, they help us to understand and make sense of the deep anger in our society, violently expressed in the burning of buildings and destruction of anachronistic symbols. Secondly, they explain the vandalism that has accompanied its most thoughtful interventions. Some of the interventions have been thoughtful, but it also helps us understand those that are non-thoughtful, such as the vandalism. There is no denying that in the current economic system, the poor and marginalized have figured out that they have very little to lose. And so while vandalism is unacceptable and criminal, and in the end will affect the poor more harshly, rather than just condemning it, we need to understand why it is happening. So to just say it's criminal, they must be arrested and locked up is one thing. The issue is, do we understand it? What does it teach us? So our engagement with our young people should be from the point of understanding and an acknowledgement of why the levels of anger are what they are. And that is the first step to make sure that they can hear us. And I'm not saying they will always hear us, but the first step for any of our young people to hear us is understanding why things are happening the way they are. Thirdly, the protests are calling for a complete rejection of the systemic, the symbolic, and intellectual worlds which are inhospitable to black people. Students are telling us that they don't feel at home in our institutions. They do not recognize themselves in what they are forced to learn. And they have to and they have to learn disciplinary languages that have no roots in African context, apart from also having to study in a language that is not their own. They see the dominance of English and the growth of Afrikaans, whilst their languages are disregarded despite being official, and they get angry. Finally, the protests remind us that we have to free ourselves politically, culturally, economically, and intellectually to realize proper academic freedom. And this will link academic freedom with accountability. But what do we need to do? Is there hope for the future? I say we need a different kind of radicalism, the kind that can reimagine the university, its role in our constantly changing society, and its clarity about what the academic project should be about. We need a radicalism that does not use the American or British university as a model of what our higher education system should be. And perhaps this radicalism doesn't only look at ensuring that students can recognize themselves in the institution, but also thinks about the future that's completely different from the present that we are in. A radicalism that accepts activism as an important part of university life, especially in today's world where there is so much inequality and poverty. If our students, just imagine, if our students were cowed, if they were docile, quiet, and uncritical, then not only would our universities be poorer, but so will our society. If student activists cannot be heard, then there is no chance that active citizens anywhere in our society will be heard. And actually, we as South Africans should appreciate activism in our society. We just came out of a really, well, we are not out really. We just had like 10 years of a presidency that many of us wondered, how did we get there? It is activism that helped us get out of it, and we're suffering the consequences, and we will suffer them for a few more years. If you kill activism, you always have to remember, you kill it at universities, what happens to activism in our society? It will not happen. Universities are the only place, in my view, where activism can thrive, can grow, can become, and then it enables activisms elsewhere. And we can talk about that. But I often think about that. Do I want my students to be docile, quiet, reserved, and just take it in? Or perhaps I should rather challenge them to roll out their activism in a different way. The establishment in many societies often grows numb. Actually, the establishment in most societies often grows numb with time. It becomes deaf to the voices of its powerless majority and dismissive of the powerless as senseless and reckless. And to be honest with you, being an executive, and I've been an executive for a long time. Before I got to UCT, I was an executive at UNISA. You know, it's been a while. It's very easy to get used to the air-conditioned room or office and comfort, and just become part of the establishment. And one has to do things consciously to make sure that you don't get comfortable in your space of the air-conditioned room, even if you grew up in the township, like myself. The first order of business for the establishment is always self-preservation. In the air-conditioned office, your first thing that you want to do is self-preservation. It's all about yourself. And I talk to myself to say to myself, I don't want to get into that space where all I care about is self-preservation. Progressive leaders in every sector of our society, including universities, private schools, business and government, need to actively temper their necessary preoccupation with the protection and advancement of the real and material interests of their institutions with a healthy dose of empathy for the dictates of the unequal and in need of change in a society we are. We need to do that actively. If we don't, it's movements such as the Fallist movement who wake us up to that reality and to the fact that this world is not just about preserving ourselves. I hope I've been sufficiently provocative. I'm quite happy for a conversation. I'm aware that we're being videoed. And I'm aware that I'm in video. So part of doing this talk is actually, it's not about self-preservation. I am aware that I can have a petition that calls for me to leave my office because of the views that I share in this forum. And I am aware of your power and the power of the media and where the video will go. I'm quite aware of that. So it's a conscious step of getting out of the air-conditioned office and expressing what I think, what I believe leaders such as yourselves and me should actually do all the time to be able to be responsive to the needs of our society. I'm quite happy to take questions. Thank you, Michelle. Yes, sir.